大家好, I'm Nathan Rich, aka 火锅大王. If you've been following this whole Hong Kong issue, you probably know by now that certain fascist elements in the United States have rallied behind a law that directly affects China. As promised, I went through the details of the proposed bill, and let me tell you this. It's worse than I thought it was going to be. As my history series, Epic China, starts to roll out, you can tell my mind has been focused on imperialism. And sadly, that has proven to be much more relevant in the modern world than I ever expected. You may have heard this bill is bad. Maybe you heard it's really, really bad. I don't know what people are saying about it, actually. Unfortunately, though, I'm here to tell you that whatever you've heard is probably an understatement. Are you guys ready for this? I really wish I didn't have to do this video because this bill is absolutely insane. Before I get into the details of this bill, I want to give you a little bit of background. I'm not going to explain everything, so if you're interested in every detail, you'll need to research yourself. But here are the basics. Britain took Hong Kong from China by force. At the time, the government of Britain was the largest drug cartel in the world. And when China pushed back on the drug trade, Britain started a war to force the emperor to accept drugs being traded in the country. They also took Hong Kong to use as a regional presence. They wanted a permanent location in China so they could wage further war as needed and ship drugs as efficiently as possible. Long story short, over time, Britain became more liberal and came to agreements with China, who had renewed interest in governing Hong Kong. The city was set to be returned to full governmental rule by China in 1997. In anticipation of that, in 1992, America passed a bill that basically lays out its relationship with Hong Kong. It was meant to set the tone for trade for the upcoming handover. While China pushed back on the bill, eventually life went on. The handover happened in 1997, proving to the world that Britain had in fact evolved past its former status as international cartel. Finally, the world thought, imperialism was dying. The handover, by the way, marked the official end of the militant British Empire. Alright, so now that we understand some history, let's talk about this new bill. First, we find an outline of the American policy. It very clearly states that, quote, support for democratization is a fundamental principle of United States foreign policy. So that's pretty clear. The U.S. will actively try to support democratization. Soon we're going to see exactly what that looks like when a country doesn't want it. Then it goes over additional purposes of the bill. This one says America wants to support the democratic aspirations of Hong Kong as guaranteed to them by the Joint Declaration. That's the declaration from 1997 that accompanied the handover. So far, so good, right? No. Already it's turning shady. You see, the joint declaration was between China and Britain. You see the problem? Hong Kong wasn't guaranteed anything. They weren't part of the joint declaration. If anyone was guaranteed anything, it would have been Britain. But you see, even that is dubious because it isn't called a treaty for a reason. Notice that? It's called a declaration. The joint declaration starts by saying Britain and China both agree that Hong Kong should be returned to China. And then, and pay close attention to the wording here, it says this. The government of the People's Republic of China declares that the basic policies of the People's Republic of China regarding Hong Kong are as follows, and then lists out some guiding principles of how Hong Kong will be managed. That is China declaring that it will do several things. To me, that's not a promise to Britain any more than China declaring it will start a colony on Mars. To me, it reads like a declaration. Then the bill gets a bit worse. It claims that China has commitments to a treaty called the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. This part is very strange because China hasn't ratified that treaty. If you're not a policy nerd, you probably don't know what ratify means. Let's say you sign a contract as an individual. That signature alone is enough to make it legally binding. You are legally required to follow its contents. However, as I learned through my history series research, that's not how treaties work. When treaties are signed, it means that the country has the intent to seriously consider the treaty or eventually go through with it. It's basically the political version of a letter of intent. It's not, I repeat, not at all legally binding until the country ratifies it. Ratifying something means basically giving the official confirmation and doing several other steps, which then make the treaty legally binding. Well, China has never ratified the ICCPR. That means it is not legally binding for China. And yet this bill pretends that it is, hoping no one will notice. I noticed. And then they have invoked the international law obligations of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, let's go over this and see what those international obligations are. Oh, wait, hang on a second. Even the United States Supreme Court concluded that it, quote, does not of its own force impose obligations as a matter of international law. This historic document is not legally binding at all to anyone. Yet again, they're trying to deceive the people. They mention these two documents, neither of which have anything to do with China guaranteeing something. And finally, it mentions the Basic Law, which is kind of like a constitution written by China which applies only to Hong Kong. I repeat, it was written by the central Chinese government, Beijing. But the United States government wants to make damn sure that Hong Kong follows Basic Law. Remember that for later, okay? But let's just look at the Basic Law and see what they're referring to with all this democratic suffrage stuff. Article 45. The chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall be selected by election or through consultations held locally and be appointed by the Central People's Government. The method for selecting the chief executive shall be specified in the light of the actual situation in Hong Kong and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress. The ultimate aim is the selection of the chief executive by universal suffrage upon nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with democratic procedures. Right, so all this says is there will be an ultimate aim of democratic elections. There's no timeline or specifics, and it literally says the method shall be specified in light of the actual situation in Hong Kong. That alone is enough to say there is no guarantee, not a promise. So anyway, with that extremely misleading and deceptive paragraph out of the way, let's move on. Look at this. America wants to force China to grant Hong Kong suffrage by 2020. This bill will allow the U.S. more power over China's city. They want to change the 1992 bill and expand it wildly. Here they've written they will start making lists of people who are arrested for being in the 2014 protests, or detained, or targeted, which could literally mean anything as minor as having the police simply ask someone their name. And here's where the intentional support of Hong Kong separatism comes in. It's spelled out plainly. Are you ready for this? This bill would require the U.S. to proactively inform Hong Kong residents that they will still be able to get an American visa even if they have crimes related to protests. Not just the 2014 protests. This time they include any protests. I repeat, the United States government wants to start telling Hong Kong citizens that they will have no problems getting visas no matter what crimes they've committed, as long as those crimes are in defiance of the government. We have seen many reports of crimes coming from these riotous groups in Hong Kong. Drugging and raping, gang rapes, beatdowns, firebombs. It doesn't matter. The United States stands behind you. Do you understand what I just told you? Then the U.S. will go to other countries and try to get them to do the same. They also, by the way, continuously refer to Hong Kong and China to further antagonize the situation. Then it goes on for a while about how the U.S. will have rights to assessments of imports to Hong Kong, so more power over China's city. And here they clearly refer to mainland China as a country, which is another obvious slap because it separates Hong Kong from China in the text. And it goes on about American citizens in Hong Kong. I don't have much issue there. For the first time in this entire bill, at least it's talking about people over which the government has jurisdiction. Remember the extradition bill? Well, if one like it ever passes, look at this little clause. The U.S. will make an assessment of whatever additional resources are needed in the Hong Kong consulate. You mean like troops? That's the thing. We don't know. The bill is just wide open. Like I said, the United States really wants China to follow the basic law, at least the version that America made up. They respect it and want it to be followed completely. All right, well, what's the next one? The U.S. wants to also be able to bring in resources if Hong Kong enacts a law that follows Basic Law Article 23. And on top of that, they're threatening to potentially break trade and other agreements if they do. Don't believe me? Read it. If Hong Kong follows basic law, they will risk the United States potentially bringing in military troops. And what is this Article 23 of the Basic Law that they hate so much? Let's take a look. It says that Hong Kong will make its own laws to stop treason and sedition against the government. And to, get this, prohibit foreign political activities or bodies in the region. That's right, the United States wants to prevent Hong Kong from enacting its own rule of law. If Hong Kong follows its own laws, the U.S. will potentially bring in troops and will potentially break treaties with Hong Kong. I wonder, why would the U.S. be fighting so hard to allow foreign political influence in Hong Kong? Does anyone see this? I mean, this is literally imperialism, right? Then the bill goes on to say that the President of the United States will be able to give a list of names to Congress. The list will be of people that he has decided are responsible for the arrests of any one of several people in 2016. They were committing sedition against China, which is not illegal in Hong Kong, but is illegal in the mainland. So it's kind of like how something can be legal in California, but illegal in the U.S. The federal government can still arrest you. It's not just the arrests of these people America is concerned about, but also any surveillance of them or even just detaining them. Some of these guys got international attention because they made accusations against China or seemed to just disappear from Thailand or wherever else. But they were already printing anti-Chinese materials beforehand, so it's a little unclear. At least one guy was arrested in mainland China for distributing illegal materials to the mainland. So anyway, this bill is trying to make it so the president will have a list of anyone he deems responsible for any of this, and then the U.S. will blacklist those people from entering America. But here's where the reward for the U.S. really comes in. Anyone the president puts on this list who has money, property, or investments in America can have them seized or taken away. But it's not just if they have those things in America, it's also any time those things enter America. If a plane flies over American airspace, everything aboard owned by anyone on this list can be taken away immediately. It's also if any of those things come into possession or control of an American. This is a big money grab. I'm not a lawyer, but as I read it, this would make it legal for the United States to confiscate all assets from theoretically any Chinese person, including Hong Kong residents. All the president has to do is write a name on a list. Technically, it doesn't even specify the nationality of the people, so it could theoretically be anyone in the world. On top of that, anyone who tries to get around the government confiscating their possessions can be imprisoned for up to 20 years and fined for up to $1 million. So if you find out you've been put on the asset kill list by the President of the United States, and then you try to call your friend to send you your stuff, he could be put in prison for helping you, even if he doesn't know the situation. All the president must do, again, is just put you on a list. Then the bill mentions some reporting, and it's over. To me, it looks like the U.S. is trying to do these things. 1. Force China to accelerate the timeline for Basic Law Article 45 and change the definition of it to promise suffrage, which it currently does not. 2. Force China not to adhere to Basic Law Article 23 so that the U.S. can continue to take political actions in Hong Kong. 3. Reinvigorate the rioters by giving them special advantages when it comes to visas. 4. Gain financial leverage on Chinese or Hong Kong people who have assets in America. So that's it. That's the so-called Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. Before we go, I just want to leave you with a definition. Imperialism. A policy or ideology of extending a nation's rule over foreign nations, often by military force or by gaining political and economic control of other areas. As an American, I would like to apologize on behalf of my country. I can't stop them. They think they're saving the world by taking it over. I'm doing everything I can. I'm sorry. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.